Have you ever mixed two colors and thought it would be beautiful but ended up with a dull, muddy mess? Well, if you have, you're not alone. I'm Ashy, and today we're going to dive into color theory. So this is the first in a series of videos that I plan to make on the subject. And today what we're going to look at is specifically the color wheel and the differences between the traditional color wheel, which is red, yellow, and blue, and the quote-unquote modern color wheel, which is cyan, magenta, and yellow. And so we're going to look at why those are both important, kind of the differences between them, and how we can use them to better our art practice. So let's flow right into it. So here I have my colors that I'm going to use for the two color wheels. The first one we're going to look at is the traditional color wheel. So this is kind of the historical color wheel where we have red, blue, and yellow. I'm going to use the same yellow for both of my color wheels today, just because, you know, it's yellow. So red, blue, and yellow, and then cyan, magenta, and yellow. So I'm using the same yellow, but you can pick different colors, and we'll get into that in a minute. So this color wheel goes way, way, way back historically, and this goes all the way back to and is documented in the 18th century with famous painters like Moses Harris and a poet and theorist, Goethe. And they really helped to kind of establish this as a standard for painting. So back then there was kind of more limited pigments. So pigments like French ultramarine and vermilion and ochre were very common, and they were used to then mix other colors. And so without the option for synthetic pigments, the variety was a little bit more limited, and artists kind of found that you could pretty much make any color with this combination, especially if you added white in there. So they used a lot of white as well for like oil painting. And there are no limitations with it, like creating vibrant purples. But this was the traditional mix based on what pigments were available. So we're gonna go through and create a color wheel based on this mix. So I'm just gonna squeeze out a tiny amount of each of these, and we don't need much. Okay, so that's ultramarine. There's the Pyrrol Scarlet. And then here's the Hansa Yellow Light. And so these are kind of the truest, quote unquote, red, blue, and yellow that I have here. And then we're going to do this first color wheel. And this is going to be my red, blue, yellow color wheel. And so we're going to start with Hansa Yellow Light at the top. And then we're going to do the red, the Pyrrol Scarlet over here. And then the blue, ultramarine, over here. So when you're making your own color wheels, you can do it a variety of ways, but I like to divide it this way and have 3 steps in between so that we can get the primary colors, the secondary colors, and then the tertiary colors. So that's how I divide my color wheels, but you can really do it however you want. And you don't have to do a color wheel at all if you don't want to. You can just swatch colors, but having color wheels will make it a little bit easier to see the variations. Okay, so then we're gonna start just by getting my brush wet, taking a little bit of each color. And then just coloring in the wedge of our circle. And I'm adding more water as I come toward the center to lighten it up. So there's my yellow. And then I'm gonna go to my red next. So make sure I don't have a ton of water because I want that outer edge to be mass tone, which is pure pigment and the darkest value that we can get with the paint. And then I'm just going to add that water again. And then blend it out. Okay, and then I'm going to move on to the blue. Okay, so then we're going to start mixing our colors. So here we're going to try for a 50-50 mixture of our red and yellow. And I'm going to mix that in this well here. So there's the red. While I'm doing that, I'm going to put some red over here so that I can have it ready to mix with the blue. Okay. And then make sure my brush is nice and clean. I have multiple jars of water here if I need to switch it up and get cleaner water. Okay, so then I'm going to take some yellow and mix that with my red. Okay. And when you're making these color wheels, you don't have to use tube paints like I am. If you have pan paints and you want to see what you can come up with your red, yellow, blue color wheel with your pan paints, do the same thing. You're just going to want to wet your paints first so that you can get a nice darker value pigment. Okay, so there is my secondary color of orange in the red, blue, yellow color wheel. My dog loves to drink water while I'm filming, so that's loud. So the next one we're gonna do is our red and blue. So I'm gonna take some of that red and bring it to the middle here. I added quite a bit of water there. I'm gonna add just a little bit more of the red. Oops, that's a lot, but that's okay. Okay, there's red. Okay, so now I'm going to take some blue and mix it with that red. And here you're going to see where the limitations are in this palette of the red, blue, and yellow. Okay, so I'm mixing it, trying to get a 50-50 mixture. Okay, and you can see it is purple, but it's a little bit of a muted purple, like a brownish purple. It's not super vivid and bright purple. Okay, so we will contrast that with our other color wheel in a few minutes. Okay, so there's our purple, and then we're gonna do our, that was supposed to be purple. That's okay. I'm gonna do green here, it's fine. So I'm gonna take some of the blue and mix it with the remaining yellow here to get green. Okay, trying to go for a 50-50 mix. Again, it's kind of eyeballing it though, it's nothing precise. So then we're going to move on to our tertiary colors. Okay, so tertiary colors are going to be in between the primary and the secondary colors here. So let me add just a touch of yellow here. And we have a more yellow green. Okay, so you can add and shift it and make it more toward the yellow and kind of get that lime green color. And then we can add even more blue to it and get a more blue-green color. Okay, so that's how you're going to create your tertiary colors, just adding a touch of the primary, of one primary to another, so that you're just shifting that color a little bit. Okay, now we're going to do the same for our orange. So I'm going to take some yellow and add it to my orange here. And then place that in between. And then we can add more red to that. To place it in between the orange and the red. Okay, and then with the purples, Do the same thing, so I can add more red. And that makes this beautiful like brick red color for mixing ultramarine and Pyrrol Scarlet. It's a very pretty color. Now, it doesn't look purple though, right? It still looks warm, and we'll get into temperature, color temperature in a little bit too, but it still looks like this muted, not vibrant. It's not like a pinky purple, right? So it's very much still like a red. Okay, and then I can add a bunch of blue to that to shift it toward the ultramarine. And that's kind of how I think about color mixing in general. It's just like pushing colors around to shift them toward another color. And that's kind of what I think about in my head when I'm color mixing. So I want to shift this color a little bit more purple. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of red. Okay? So that's a good way to think about the color wheel. So that's our traditional red, blue, yellow. So you get some beautiful colors. You know, these greens are gorgeous. They're very natural looking, but they're not like bright neon greens, right? Our purples are, again, very muted and kind of natural looking. They don't look bright and vibrant. And then we have our oranges and reds, which are, you know, when you mix a very bright red with yellow, you're going to get a nice bright orange. So that's kind of the traditional color wheel. And again, this was taught because this was kind of the original pigments that were available. And then it just kind of stuck because it's a very clean, kind of easy way to think about color with the 3 primaries, the 3 secondaries, and then the tertiary colors. And it's kind of a little bit more simple. But the thing to remember is that color is not, so if you kind of think about it like numbers, right? Numbers can be 1, 2, 3, 4, like integers. Well, that's a color wheel, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're integers. But in reality, color is a continuous spectrum. It doesn't have those strict divisions like that. So think about it as those like decimal points and those irrational numbers between the integers, if you like math. It's a continuous spectrum. And so even though we tend to divide the color wheel up like this, so that we have a starting point to talk about it, that doesn't mean that that's the reality of colors. The reality of colors is more like this, where they just all blend from one to another, and it's a continuous spectrum of color. And so you might mix a green and come up with something that's like this, and that's green, right? Or you could be right here, and that's green, and that's green. And if you and I both mix a different color, the same 2 colors even, we're going to come up with a different hue, a different spot along this spectrum. And that's okay, because humans can detect anywhere from 1 million to 10 million different hues. And that's normal humans. Some people even have extra cells in their eyes extra sensory cells where they can detect even upwards of 100 million different specific hues. We don't have names for them all. We can't. But we have to break that down and be able to talk about it in a uniform, universal way. So that's where these color wheels come in. Okay. Now to shift to our other color wheel, which we're going to use, again, the same yellow, Hansa Yellow Light. We're going to use Phthalo Blue Green shade, which is cyan, and then Quinacridone Rose, which is magenta, or like a pink color. And this color wheel came about basically with the start of printing, because people in printing wanted to develop the least number of colors required to create the most variety of hues. And this was what they found worked the best when you combine it with black in a printer, right? So these are your like printer cartridge inks. And it's very effective to create a huge spectrum of different colors. And it was cost effective to just have the 3 colors and black. So we're gonna make our color wheel based on these 3. Okay, so got my yellow, my phthalo blue, and I'm using Daniel Smith. These colors all came from the split primary set. So it's a set of 6 colors. It does have one more yellow that is a lot more orange, so it doesn't work as well in the color wheels. But these are great paints and a great starter set. Here's that other yellow that's more orange, New Gamboge. But you can use, again, whatever brand of paint you like. It doesn't really matter. You're gonna find these colors, a good yellow, a good magenta, a good cyan in any professional range of paints or even student grade. You're gonna find these colors. So choose what you can afford and what you like, and then test it yourself, okay? So we're gonna start with yellow on the top, just like we did for our RBY color wheel. Put that extra there so I don't waste it all. And then we're gonna use magenta. So we leave 3 spots and then we do our next color. I didn't label it yet. I will. Okay, and then we're gonna have our blue, or cyan, which is phthalo blue. Okay, and then we're gonna start mixing our secondary colors in this. Let me label these real quick. So we have Hansa Yellow Light, we have Quinacridone Magenta, and then we have Phthalo Blue Green shade. Okay, so now we're gonna mix our yellow with our pink, and then I'm gonna take some pink and move it up here for when I make purple. And then I'm just gonna take a little bit of that and mix it in with the yellow. Okay, so when we mix pink and yellow, we get an orange color here. If I mix a little bit more yellow into that, we'll get our tertiary color that's in this wheel. So let me do that really quick. And so you can see how that shifts from this very bright orange to this more yellowy orange, right? And then if I add more pink into it, we get basically a red, okay? So here's where that original color wheel of the primary colors being blue, yellow, and red, and they're primary because you can't mix them from other colors, is just kind of incorrect, because you can mix red. If you have pink, you can mix red. And to say that, just doing a lighter version of red makes pink, that's sort of true. This is sort of pink, but it's sort of orange also, right? If it's a lighter red. So having a true pink, you can make red. This color and this color are very similar. They are not the same, but they are very similar. Okay, so that's our kind of orange side of the color wheel for the CYM colors. Now we can do our purple. So I can take some of our blue and mix it in with our pink. Again, kind of trying for that half and half mixture. And then I'm gonna draw that out and lighten it up. Because in mass tone, or like the darkest mix that we can make, that's a super, super dark purple. Okay, and then we lighten it up and it's this nice, vibrant purple. Okay, versus our blue and red mixture, which is a muted purple, right? Both are beautiful, both have different strengths and reasons that we would use them, but they are definitely different, okay? Now, if we add more pink into that, we get a more pink purple, right? And I don't know if it makes me not a good painter, but I have boy colors. So I have pink, purple, blue, you know, boy colors. I don't, even cyan. I'm like, I don't know what's cyan. The only reason I know that is because of this color wheel and it's very common. But like, I don't know what to call this color, but it's beautiful and it's purple, but it's kind of pink also. So pinky purple, right? I know it has a name, but I just don't know what it is. Okay, and then if we add more blue to that mix, we get another purple. This color is one that my daughter likes to call blurple because it's a bluish purple. And so some people would say that this is blue and some people would say that this is purple. And I would say, yes, you're right, whatever you want. But we know how to make it, right? Because we mixed magenta with cyan. And it's almost, I mean, it's kind of similar to ultramarine, I guess. So if you want to call it blue, but it's a bluish purple, okay? And it's nice and vibrant. Okay, now we're gonna do our greens. So we're gonna take just a little bit of the blue and mix it in with our yellow. And I'm gonna start with this one, which is gonna be more of our yellowish green color because I just don't have very much yellow and I don't wanna put more out on there. So I'm starting with the more yellow one, okay? And then we can just add a little bit more blue to it and then even more blue to it, okay? And then you'll see that hue shift from this cyan to a more like aqua or turquoisey blue. I never know the difference between aqua and turquoise because, again, boy colors. But that shifts, and then we have this kind of middle, vibrant, like springy green, and then this is like a very bright lime green, almost neon. So we have our two different color wheels here. So again, let's compare, right? Our oranges are pretty similar, okay? This is very similar, each one. And then this is like more like this one, I guess. But if we mixed these two colors, we could create something like this, right? Then we have our pink with a little bit of yellow in it, and that's almost our red, okay? And then we go to our purples, and we created something kind of similar to an ultramarine blue. It's not exactly, but if we put a little less pink in it, it'd be even closer, right? But this is a very different color than this. It's beautiful, it's cool, it's actually warm, but it's a very muted color. And this is a more kind of pure purpley blue color. Same with our middle, right? This is clearly purple. This is kind of brownish. Pretty, but brown, not a bright purple. And then our greens, when you mix this blue with this yellow, we get these kind of more natural earthy tone greens versus our cyan and yellow gets us these kind of springy bright greens. These are a little bit more fake looking, right? So it kind of makes sense because this is what we use to print, right? Now, can we create these greens with this color wheel? Yes, we can, but that we'll go into in a little bit in another video actually, but they're very different, okay? So it's good to understand both of them. So then you can really test this yourself, right? So you can make color wheels yourself. Just grab your colors. If you have pans instead of tubes, so this is really messy, but these are pans that I filled myself, but I could take a blue, so this is cobalt. I didn't do cobalt in here. I could take cobalt mixed with my lemon yellow and my permanent rose. These are Winsor & Newton colors, and see what kind of color wheel I came up with. So it's good to, you know, practice with your own paints. So I highly recommend that you make some color wheels. And then if you want, you can kind of play with just doing little donuts of color and drop in, you know, some pure pigment and then add some water and blend them together, right? So this is Quinacridone Rose, New Gamboge, and Phthalo Blue. So that's not one of these color wheels that I did. And I blended them together and see how that differs from the Quin Rose, or I put Quin Rose. It's supposed to be Quinacridone and then Magenta. Anyway, our Quin, Magenta, our New Gamboge, and our Ultramarine versus phthalo blue. And you can see the difference. So we get the same pinks, obviously, because we're mixing the same blue and yellow. But our blue and pink. But our greens are different. So these are, again, more earthy greens versus these are kind of earthy because the new gamboge is more orange, but these are a little bit more vibrant than these, right? So you can play with your different colors and just swatch them. So this was another way of doing that, just not in a circle. Okay. So the best way to get to know your colors and to be able to color mix intuitively versus having to think about it each time, refer back to your swatches and, read about it, is to play with your colors and to practice. And then, if you want to keep these types of pages as quick reference, do it. And, you can be like, oh, I really like that hue. I know that I need to mix these two. And then over time, you'll learn to identify the properties of the paints that you have and then intuitively mix versus having to be so precise with it. But the only way to do that is to get to know your paints. So that wraps up our color wheel video here. If you let me know kind of which color palette you like to do, or if you throw it to the wind and do convenience colors instead of trying to mix your own colors, which is where they're pre-mixed from a pan or in a pan or from a tube. But let me know kind of which palette you gravitate toward and why. And if you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean a lot. It definitely helps. And like the video, same thing. It helps it kind of get seen and get pushed out. And again, leave a comment about what you found most interesting, what you like the best, or what kind of your primaries are that you like to go to for your colors. And stay tuned, again, subscribe, because the next video is going to be all about those warm and cool colors and what that means and how to use it. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep those colors flowing.